Hey guys, today we're doing chapter 16, waste generation and waste disposal, that I also like to call the trash unit. This will be getting us ready for our mini field trip to the landfill. And just kind of a thought to start off these notes with is that most of the time in the natural world, one organism's waste can be used by another organism for some sort of purpose, but it's said that humans are the only organisms that can produce waste that others cannot use. And so that's going to bring us to our first slide, where we're talking about what we call the throwaway society, which is what we live in now. And there's an idea that says until a society becomes wealthy, it generates very little waste. And if we look back at our history, before the 1900s, virtually anything left over, any sort of leftover metal, wood, glass, it was all recycled in some way in the U.S. So a specific example of this would be if you had a bookshelf that broke, you could have somebody who was a skilled laborer that would be able to turn that into a step stool. And then if that broke, or if you weren't able to repair that, you would actually burn that wood to generate heat in your house. Also, back during that time, we had lots of junk and scrap metal dealers that made their livelihoods off of taking old materials and selling them for other uses. And then, throughout history, as wealth accumulated, we were able to now purchase new goods and then throw away the old broken ones. So that's the society that we live in now, the throwaway society. Consumers are encouraged to do this via what's called the planned, and I totally botched this word. I don't know why spell check didn't catch it. This is supposed to be obsolescence. So OBSOLECENCE, obsolescence. This, I don't know what I did here. So what planned obsolescence is the idea that designing products that are going to need to be replaced within a few years. And that's kind of the way that life functions now. You buy a phone, an iPhone, whatever kind of phone, Android, and within another year or two, it's already out of date. The camera is no good, the video camera is no good compared to what the newest technologies are. So in order to kind of keep up, we feel the need to buy the latest and greatest edition of that phone. And where do the old phones go? And we'll kind of talk about that with electronic recycling and stuff here in a few slides. Same thing with TVs, same thing with old computers. Things become outdated very, very, very quickly in this day and age. In the U.S., we became the leaders of this throwaway society in the 1960s. When things like disposable plates, napkins, cups, TV dinners, even diapers. Before disposable diapers, we had reusable cloth diapers. All these disposable items became popular in the 60s, so we kind of took over as this throwaway society. Okay, and now on to what we call, you're going to see MSW a lot throughout these notes. We call that municipal solid waste. And it says this is refuse collected by municipalities from households, so a lot of household and like community waste. Could be small businesses, could be small institutions like schools, prisons, municipal buildings, and hospitals. So out of these categories, it says 60% comes from residences, households, and 40% would come from the commercial buildings and institutions. And the trend, I had to make this graph a little bit smaller to fit it on here, is that waste has been increasing in the past decades except for a recent decrease, and we can say that's probably due to better recycling facilities. And developing countries are contributing an increasing amount of waste due to many of the developed world's goods being manufactured here. An example of this would be computers. So a lot of these electronics are manufactured in the developing world and then they ship them to us, but because the manufacturing occurs in their country, they're going to end up having a higher amount of waste due to this manufacturing process. And then this little idea right here is a good example of the footprint that even purchasing and using a new item like a computer can have on the entire world. Even though we don't think about the manufacturing process and where it was made, there's a good chance that a bunch of waste from a computer that you bought that was made in a developing country is going to end up in a landfill in a developing country. Okay, and then this is really important. We're going to, on the next couple slides, we're going to talk about the breakdown of categories of waste. One of the things I want you guys to know of is that one of our largest categories of waste for municipal waste, meaning like from households and that sort of thing, comes in the form of paper and packaging and stuff that we buy. So that's kind of one of your largest categories here. We're going to have another large category, we'll look at this on the next slide, of stuff that we consider organic materials like wood, yard trimmings, food scraps, stuff that can actually be composted for the most part. And then you have rubber, leather, and textiles, plastics, metals, glass, and others as smaller categories. And then if we break these categories down by their source, where they're actually coming from, I kind of talked about this a little bit on the other pie chart, is that a lot of containers and packaging and the stuff that we buy, what it comes in is generating most of the trash. So if we can find ways to cut down on the packaging stuff, that would greatly reduce our trash coming from households. Your second largest thing is your food and your yard waste. Again, a lot of this stuff could be composted instead of going to the landfill. You've got another kind of large chunk here from non-durable goods, going back to that whole disposable idea, that throwaway society idea. A non-durable good is going to be something that's not going to last very long. It's disposable, you throw it away. And then your durable goods are going to be larger items you've probably spent more money on that you expect to last you a long time, but eventually that stuff is going to probably either break or kind of go out of style, and so you have to get rid of it. So this would be like appliances, furniture, those sorts of things. Okay, so here's a breakdown of the composition of municipal solid waste. Now, looking at these numbers, this number is the largest. These are your organic materials, but notice we have lots of different categories here. So technically we would say the largest category of all one type of waste would be paper, and that comes in at 31%. So this 33% of organic materials would come from yard waste, like grass clippings, food scraps, and wood. 18% we already said would be durable goods like appliances, tires, furnitures, and then 12% would be plastic. Okay, e-waste is what we call electronic waste. That's going to be things like your TVs, your computers, your cell phones that have gone out of date or they're broken and we need to get rid of them now. You should know they contain toxic materials in them. They also contain many precious metals that we could use over again. So it's really important that the more technologically enhanced our society becomes, the more we embraced doing what we call e-cycling, recycling electronics. Here it says, much of this happens in countries like China where protective equipment is not used and children are sometimes part of the workforce. Oh, this is talking about recovering metals from electronics. A lot of this does go down in developing countries. We send a lot of our e-waste to these developing countries so that we don't do it so that these people can get the metals, but we don't really know what else to do. So we send our electronic waste to these developing countries where these people who live there are put in dangerous situations trying to recover those metals to make money from them. Okay, yeah, so that last picture was referring to e-cycling. So kind of an interesting tidbit here. It says it usually costs more money to recycle a computer than it does to put it in a landfill due to difficulties in dismantling it. And it's estimated that currently less than 20% of electronics are recycled. There are plenty of places in the community that you can take electronics to be e-cycled. You can take them, I think even Target takes back phones. I know they take ink cartridges, but they take back phones and small electronic devices. I believe Staples does the same thing. I think if you want to e-cycle a computer at Staples, you actually have to pay a fee for it, though, which goes back to this first thing. There are plenty of charity websites, and we'll pull some up and talk about them in class, where you can send your phone. You just go online and register it, and they'll send you a mailing a label for free, and you can send your phone and donate it to a charity of your choosing, and then they will use those metals and devote any money that comes from them to that charity. So that's a really good idea for old phones. You should not be leaving old phones just sitting around your home. You should send them to be e-cycled. Something that's kind of interesting too, we'll watch a video clip of this in class. Much of U.S. e-waste is sent to China, which is what that picture was of on the last slide, where adults and children use fire and acids to separate those valuable metals from the electronics, usually with no protective gear and not a whole lot of knowledge of what they're doing, so it can be dangerous for them. Okay, so we need to talk about the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, and recycle. These would be ways to reduce the amount of waste going to landfills and then also reuse valuable materials that are already in the cycle of resources so that we don't have to go back into the ground and dig up new materials. So to start with, reduce, we can think of this as what we call source reduction, which is when we want to lower the amount of materials put into a system, which would then lower the outputs from the system. Anytime a company does source reduction, it would also save them money as well, so it makes a lot of sense both environmentally and economically. So when we reduce, we want to do waste minimization or prevention. Here are some great examples, and again, a lot of this comes down to companies that create products just using less materials from the get-go. So CD packaging has decreased substantially. Since I remember them in the 80s, CDs used to come in these big long packages with lots of cardboard and this little plastic sling in there, and then the plastic wrapping too. They went from doing that to like plastic CD covers, and then they went to cardboard, just little teeny tiny covers, and now most of it is just downloaded digitally. So the amount of waste coming from music packaging has drastically decreased. So that's a really good example. So again, not only is that saving materials, it's saving a lot of money. Offices buying reusable plastic coffee mugs for their employees to replace disposable paper mugs, or even styrofoam cups. And we'll talk about a little case study that your book goes into with comparing a paper cup to a styrofoam cup. There's some interesting pros and cons with both of those ideas. And then just stuff that anybody can do in any sort of facility, including our school, and I try to do this as much as I can, making 2-sided paper copies. I try to put multiple pages onto a single sheet of paper as well, doing like 2 papers on one, or 2 pages on one piece of paper, and then doing front to back, so that can drastically reduce the amount of ingoing paper as well. And then a lot of teachers are now using more stuff electronically and online to avoid paper altogether. Okay, so the best thing you can do is reduce. If you can't reduce, the second best thing would be to reuse stuff that's already in the cycling of resources. So reusing something like a disposable cup more than once is definitely a good example of reusing something. A really good example of what a lot of beverage companies are doing is they can reuse bottles, glass bottles, and you've probably even heard about people being able to, return bottles for you get a small payback for doing that. But in many different countries, you return that glass bottle, they sterilize it, and then that same glass bottle is used over again, and just replaced with more of that same type of beverage. A really good example of what a lot of people, even in this area, I see a lot of these online, online yard sales and online clothes swaps and even free cycles, where you can just trade or even purchase items from people online. eBay, Craigslist, free cycle, selling used goods can keep a lot of waste from going to the landfill. And then if you can't reduce or reuse, you'd want to then recycle. And this is when materials are collected and converted into raw materials and then used to produce new objects. And there's 2 different types of recycling. There's what we call closed loop recycling and open loop recycling. Closed loop recycling is what we think of as your typical recycling. That's where you're going to turn something into the same product that it used to be. A little bit different from the bottles we just talked about with sterilizing them. For that, they're actually just using a bottle, sterilizing it, using that same bottle. With recycling, especially like an aluminum can, you put your aluminum can in the recycling bin that gets sent to the recycling part of the landfill. They do in the single sorting or sorry, the no sorting recycling, like what we have in our county. You just dump all of your recycling goods into that one box, and you've got a nice little sorting system that occurs, and I'll show you guys a video of that in class. With the metals, a lot of it's done through different types of magnets. Sometimes you actually have to have human sorting occurring. But anyways, so you'd sort out the aluminum cans via special magnets. They would send them to a recycling facility. They would rinse and then flatten out all of those aluminum cans, remelt them, and roll them into long strips of new aluminum sheets, and then they can make new cans from that. And so they say about 2/3 of aluminum cans are recycled in our country as of today. And so an old aluminum can be turned into a completely new aluminum can within a matter of months. So that's a pretty good success story there with aluminum cans. Steel cans, like the cans that you would have your soup and cat food and that sort of stuff in, those also are greatly recycled. So that's another good success story. Okay, and then a different type of recycling is called open loop recycling, and that's where a product such as a plastic soda bottle can be recycled into something totally different, like a polar fleece jacket. And if you guys are familiar with the company Patagonia, which I've seen quite a few of you guys wear some of their fleeces and stuff. They're a really cool company. They do a lot of this recycling where they turn plastic stuff into fleece jackets. That's one reason why some of their stuff is a little bit more expensive. It says this recycling technique avoids sending the bottle to the landfill, but it does not reduce the demand for the raw material. Some facts about recycling. It says roughly 1/3 of municipal solid waste in the U.S. does get recycled. It's actually higher in some other countries, though. So we've definitely got some growing to do with recycling, but we have seen a lot of positive steps with that. Again, we just got these huge recycling bins in our county, and we do that no sort, so it's made recycling a lot more easier for people to do. You used to have to sort out all your recycled goods on your own, wash them out and actually drive and take them to recycling bins in the community. Now they come and pick it up from your homes in one big box, so they've made it much easier. So you really don't have an excuse to not be recycling. And this just says, out of the 3 R's, recycling uses the most energy, so you'd want to do that as kind of last resort. If you can, we would want to reduce the amount of goods that are going to the landfill or the recycling, and then secondly, we'd want to reuse as many things as we can, and then finally, if you can't do either of those two, then we'd recycle. And then obviously your last step would be going to the landfill if you can't meet any of those other criteria. And then just think, with recycling, anytime that we can avoid extracting new resources from the earth, this is a good thing. It's gonna save materials, energy, water, etc. So recycling is a very good environmental success story. Okay, these pictures are actually the same. This one is just blowing it up. So this is showing you, this whole top part is showing us closed loop recycling. So this shows, we would get the materials like benzene and other petroleum raw materials that come from petroleum, okay? So a lot of synthetic materials come from petroleum. You can make carpet fibers from petroleum-based raw materials. We could then use those to create a carpet. Once that carpet is old and used up, we don't want it anymore, we could send it to a collection and recycling facility, and it could recycle those old carpet fibers into new carpet fibers to make new carpet. So that's closed loop, using old materials to make the same type of material over and over again. Then that other type of recycling we talked about is open loop, and so this is going to show you how we make old plastic into something different like a polar fleece. So again, you would originally start with the raw materials that come from petroleum. Then you could use that to make plastic stuff like plastic bottles. Plastic bottles are being used by the consumers. They go in the recycling bin and they're collected. They go to the recycling facility, and those plastic bottles are then turned into plastic fibers. We can also use some other new plastic fibers that come from petroleum as well. And so taking a little combination of new stuff and recycled stuff, we can make something new like a polar fleece. Okay, let's talk about composting real quick. Composting is when you can use organic materials that we can decompose under controlled conditions to produce an organic rich material. It's kind of what we call a win-win scenario using our 7 Habits language. There's two advantages you get to composting organic material. First of all, you avoid sending things like yard clippings and leftover food, like here's an orange peel. You avoid sending those to a landfill. That would take up space in a landfill. And then you also get this really nice nutrient-rich soil that you can use in your yard and your garden. So it's a win-win. We get 2 wins out of that situation. Okay, so let's talk about some specifics on composting. You can use food and yard waste that should not be going to the landfill, okay, since we said they can be composted and they would just take up space in the landfill anyways. Also, when they undergo decomposition in anaerobic environments, meaning that in environments that are lacking oxygen, they can create methane gas, which we know is a really strong greenhouse gas. Here are some things that can be composted. You can compost any leftover veggies or veggie residues, corn stalks, animal manure, yard waste like grass clippings, old dead leaves and branches, paper fibers that are not being recycled. So maybe you can shred up some old paper, that sort of thing. You can compost those. Things we don't want to compost would be any leftover meat and dairy products. For several reasons, they're very stinky. They would make your compost pile smell really bad. They don't decompose well, and they can actually attract bad bacteria and pests. So you don't want to do that. You just want to be doing basically leftover plant material. You can actually make a pile of this stuff in your yard and just kind of, you'd have to read about the science behind it, but basically you're just going to kind of turn it over every once in a while to aerate it. Or you can actually buy a special container that they usually have like a little handle on the side that you can spin, and that'll kind of turn over that decomposing stuff on its own. You can actually buy little kits if you live in like an apartment or a small living situation. You could actually buy little kits where you can do this in your kitchen without even having it to be outside, and if you do it correctly you can do it in such a way that it won't even smell bad. So that is composting. Okay, and then at landfills they can do large-scale composting, so they show how that would happen. Step 1, it says the waste is dumped in the tipping area. It would be organic waste like newspaper, leaves, grass, food scraps, and woody materials. Step 2, it says that you'd have your compostable and your non-compostable materials separated. Step 3, your non-compostable material is removed and it's sent to the actual landfill part. Step 4 is that the compostable material is aerated and turned 1 or more times to speed up the aerobic respiration for a period of 30 days to 1 year. So you've got these piles of organic materials. Number 5, the composted material is allowed to cure, so they allow it to sit and decompose. And then finally, number 6, the finished compost is transported for use. So, you know, they can use that in agriculture, they can use that in gardening, any sort of situation where you need nutrient-rich material in your yard or for land use. Okay, so now let's talk about landfills. So it says currently most solid waste is disposed of in landfills, and what we now use is what we call a sanitary landfill, and it says this is an engineered grand facility designed to hold municipal solid waste with as little contamination of the surrounding environment as possible. So back in the good old days, or I should call them the olden days, we used to just use an open dump. And these open dumps had lots of sanitation issues. Then we started to create what we call landfills. We were just using holes in the ground that existed because we were digging up soil or construction purposes, and we had these holes in the ground and we would just fill them back in with trash, and those were kind of the first landfills. It says in the early days we didn't realize the harm that they could cause when they were located near aquifers, rivers, streams, drinking water, and human habitation. So we started to realize that we needed to create more of a sanitary situation. Okay, so more on a sanitary landfill. It says that these are usually lined with clay or plastic at the bottom to impede water flow, because again we don't want anything to leach out. Now we have pipes below them to collect what we call leachate, which I'll talk more about that in a few seconds. When we are finished collecting in a landfill, we're going to cover them with soil and clay, which is called a cap. once that landfill reaches capacity. And then sometimes, even after the landfill is finished collecting and we've capped it, the land can be reclaimed. We can plant new vegetation on top, and after a while they may even allow construction of things like parks, golf courses, and playgrounds on top of it. And just really quickly, I jotted down a couple of notes about things that should go to a landfill and then things that should not go to a landfill, and we'll talk about some hazardous waste here in a few minutes as well. Things that should go to a landfill would be stuff that we call composite materials that are made up of many different materials, so it's hard to kind of break them down into their bits and pieces to recycle them. And so good examples of that would be like a juice box, which is made out of paper and waxes and coatings and different things that you wouldn't really be able to recycle. So that's like a perfect contender for a landfill. Glasses and plastics, if you can't recycle them, they could go to a landfill, but we would prefer them to be recycled. Things that should not go to a landfill would be stuff like aluminum and copper and other metals that can leach, and they should be getting recycled through especially like e-cycling anyways. And then toxic materials is a big one, and that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily know about. Things like cleaners and paints, leftover paints, motor oils, antifreezes, electronics, batteries, even certain metals, they should not be going to the landfill because they can leach toxic chemicals into the ground and maybe even into our water supplies. And I think I'm going to go ahead and stop these notes for now, and then I will do a part 2 just to kind of break these in half.